I almost always show this particular manuscript. It's a prenuptial contract, a prenup from the 11th century, and it's I find it just very funny because it's a man and he's before he gets married, he's having to stand up in court and promise to behave himself, that he won't have anything to do with his drunken, dissolute, idiotic friends. He won't drink with them in the street. He won't have anything to do with them. He won't bring them back to his house. And he also promises that he won't go off traveling anywhere unless his future wife gives him permission to do that.
Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I am here today with Dr. Melonie Schmierer-Lee, who serves as the Public Education Officer at the Genizah Research Unit at Cambridge University Library. Welcome to the program, Melonie. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Nehemia.
So I think I was one of the first people to pre-order your book, which is entitled The Illustrated Cairo Genizah. I don't know if I was, but it seemed like the day it was announced, I ordered it. And this is the book. You've co-authored it with Nick Poske, who we've had on the program. He's talked about the vowels. And you actually interviewed me once when I was doing work at Cambridge University Library. So the tables have turned, or as I think they say comically, the turns have tabled or something. All right. So it's called The Illustrated Cairo Genizah. And I feel like we've done a bunch of programs on the Cairo Genizah. Can you give us like the, I don't know, the 2-minute version of what is the Cairo Genizah from your perspective? Maybe it's not 2 minutes. Maybe it's longer. But the audience has heard about the Cairo Genizah many times. Doesn't mean they know what it is, but just give us like the short version.
Yes, I'll try and be short. I can go for a few hours. A
woman after my own heart. That's what I do. I've been nicknamed Short Story Long.
So the Cairo Genizah is a collection of almost 200,000 manuscripts we have in Cambridge University Library, and they were stored away in a synagogue storeroom in Cairo for hundreds and hundreds of years, where they were sort of stashed away because they might have been sacred in some way, and eventually they came to the attention of the Cambridge scholar Solomon Schechter, and he got permission to bring them to Cambridge, and we've been working on them here ever since. And they shed enormous light on the daily life of the communities in the Middle Ages, as well as their religious practices and all the sort of the religious and sacred texts that were found in this room as well.
When you say the communities, let's be more specific. Which communities are these?
Oh, so I mean, in Egypt and in the Middle Ages, you have Jews, Muslims, Christians, and each of those can be broken down into different subgroups as well. So for the Jews in medieval Cairo, there was a Jerusalemite community that looked towards the Jerusalem yeshiva for their religious leadership. There's Babylonian community that looked towards the Babylonian academies for their guidance, and there's community of Karaites as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I didn't know there were a whole lot of the Muslim documents I feel like I've seen some fragments of, but like what would be the most interesting Christian document that is, and I know it's a very subjective question, interesting to you, I guess. Okay.
So there are Christian Arabic Bibles in the Genizah, but some of the most interesting ones, references to Christians, are when they're sort of interacting with the Jewish community. And just one document comes to mind. It's a record of these 2 Christian women who wanted to convert. And
oh, wow.
Well, we want to convert and become Jewish, and they were told, no, you can't, you shouldn't. And they kept insisting again and again that they wanted to convert. And then the rabbi said, okay, well, if you're going to convert, then you're going to need some husbands. So they threw it open to the community. Who wants to marry these women? And 2 men stood up and said, well, okay, we'll marry them. And
why were they being told? So this will be surprising to some of my audience. To other parts of the audience know, if you came to a Muslim in the Middle Ages and said, I want to convert, they would embrace you with open arms. And if you came to the Christians today or in the Middle Ages, they'd be very... Why were the Jews saying, no, you shouldn't do that?
Well, it's I mean it's just not something that happens very often. It's this is traditionally Judaism isn't sort of seeking converts and sort of doesn't necessarily know what to do with them
So
when
they were literally told you shouldn't convert.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
incredible.
There
I
was
mean,
a
I was
delay.
told growing up that if somebody comes that wants to convert, you're supposed to turn them away 3 times. I'm not sure there's sources for that, but this maybe is in practice what was done. That's and also it was probably illegal under Islamic rule for someone to change religion. I mean, is that does
I
that
mean,
sound right?
people uh did convert and change religion. You have examples of people becoming Muslim.
Right,
Uh,
right, right. Meaning
yeah.
you could change your religion, but only become Muslim. Wasn't there something like that?
Yeah, so we don't see people coming from the Jewish community to the Christians or vice versa very very often. If if people were going to do that, they'd probably have come from outside Egypt and
Mm.
like you have this story of this monk in 1102 that has a vision in Italy and he decides he wants to convert and he has to
Wait, I
leave.
don't know this story. Is this in the
Oh, you don't know?
Geniza?
Yes, yes.
No, tell us.
Okay. Yes, so there was a monk or a priest, I'm not quite sure what he was called, Johannes, and he had a vision just after the first crusade has sort of come through. It's a great time to have a vision and realize that
Yeah.
you want to become Jewish. And so he has to leave his community and he goes traveling around the Middle East looking for a community to accept him. And he settles in Egypt and he wrote his memoirs. He wrote a prayer book
What?
and he
Really?
also uh, apparently studied or learned Gregorian chant. And so we have in the Geniza some music where he wrote some Hebrew verses that set to Gregorian chant.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So wow. So that's really interesting. Because I imagine most of the music we have is from much or let's say of musical notation, which I know nothing about, is much later. And so that
Yeah.
wow, that's very cool.
There's
That's
websites
very cool.
that you can go to and you can listen to all sorts of different groups performing this music that
Oh, wow. All right, so he comes from Italy, converts to Judaism, but it's a pretty rare thing. So you mentioned that there were Arabic Christian Bibles. Why would those end up in the Cairo Geniza, right? I mean, the Geniza was in the Ben Ezra synagogue. Did the Christians put it there, or did it somehow get into Jewish hands? And they're like, "This is a holy book; we can't let it be damaged." Or what was the? Do we know?
so so it might have come in because maybe a Jewish person had this in their possession for some reason, and then deposited it in the Geniza because in addition to putting Jewish sacred texts that are no longer fit for purpose into this Geniza storeroom, the instruction in the Mishnah is to put any worn out sacred text, even if it's one that you don't read yourself. That's where
Really?
they put it. Yeah.
So is there Quranic material? Like, are there copies of Qurans or pieces of
Yeah.
Qurans in the
Yeah.
Cairo? There are.
And that's
Wow.
really interesting because some of them, and these
Huh.
are like individual pages,
Okay.
some of them, the Qurans show fold lines, and it seems like they were once folded up, these pages of the Quran quite small, and we think they're being used as
Ooh.
amulets.
Okay. So wow. So do we think that they were Jews? I mean, I guess I don't know if we know. Are
I
there
think
sources that say
so.
Jews would use a Quran as a piece of a Quran as an amulet?
Yeah. And one of the most interesting manuscripts that I mean, I really like showing this to people, and I show it
Mhm.
alongside a page of the Hebrew Bible transcribed into Arabic script, is a, a part of the Quran in Arabic language. It's being transcribed into Hebrew characters.
Oh wow.
And I think it's from a notebook of a Jewish magician because on the other side of the document, it has a text to do with predicting the future based on how birds are flying in the sky.
Okay. It's really interesting. I read like in the in the Tanakh about these things like me'onanim and kosmim, like these forms of and like we'll just throw out terms divination, magic. We don't really necessarily know what the specifics are. And here's actually an example of that. There's this great story in the Talmud where it's talking about this rabbi who's teaching his students magic, and they say to him, "You're not allowed to do that. Why are you doing that?" He's like, "Well, how will they identify it when they encounter it if they don't know what it is?" Right? Meaning it's forbidden in the Torah. Well, how do you even know what it is? So let's talk about magic for a minute because you have a whole chapter. When
Yeah.
you say it's an amulet, you know that there's a piece of the Aleppo Codex that turned up a few decades ago. It was carried around by this Jew from Aleppo who had gone by the synagogue after it was ransacked, and he found a piece of the Aleppo Codex. He walked around with it in his pocket, in his wallet, covered in laminated. And then I think when he died, his daughter gave it to eventually to the Israel Museum. So that's an example of the most prestigious manuscript in Jewish, let's say in Judaism, being used as an amulet. What is an amulet? What would like what? I'm not.
I
So
would
so
say,
this
like,
guy in New York probably, I mean, that he was a taxi driver, thought it was protecting him. But what did it mean in the Middle Ages?
so an amulet is wearable magic.
Okay.
You might have uh, a little, sort of a little bit of paper or parchment that has something written on it, and you wear it in an amulet holder around your neck. Um, you could also sort of a mezuzah is kind of like an amulet for your house. You put a scroll.
Talk about that, because when I say it, people are skeptical. They think, "Oh, you're just saying that because you're a Karaite." What does that mean? It's like an amulet. Is that actually how people view it even today, or in the Middle Ages viewed it?
What a mezuzah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, mezuzah is kind of it is an amulet really for your house. It's a scroll with something written on it. It's a biblically authorized amulet for your house.
Okay.
And
Is
in
Yeah.
the Middle Ages, sometimes in Egypt, people would add extra elements onto their mezuzahs to make them what they presumably more powerful. So
Hmm.
we have examples of
Wait. So I have the book right here in front of
yeah
me. So I'm looking here in your book on page 116, and guys, this is a worthwhile book to have. This is amazing, and you're going to talk, I assume, about this 10th to 11th century mezuzah with some added material. Is that what we're talking about?
yes.
So tell us about this mezuzah amulet
So it has, if we see, it has the names of angels down the
on
side.
the
There's
mezuzah.
little boxes drawn around them.
Wow. So like this says Azliel,
Yeah. There's Raphael.
Tzidkiel. Oh, Raphael is, may God heal or God heals. Gavriel. And then what's this?
Yeah, so this is the divine names sort of repeated.
So this is like Yud Hey, Yud Hey, Yud Hey,
Yeah,
but it looks like it's written as three different words. So,
yeah,
um, oh, but then here at the bottom, it's just a series of Yud Heys.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it's sort of repeated in sort of a magical way. And you can see the Star of David there at the bottom. And this
Oh,
time, the Star of David isn't so much a Jewish symbol as a magical symbol. In the Islamic tradition, it's called the Seal of Solomon, and in Jewish
okay.
tradition, it's called the Star of David. And so
Or the shield of David, really, right?
yeah,
Meaning Magen David.
it's being added here
Huh.
for magical purposes, not for a Jewish reason.
This is interesting because I'm sure you guys as well get contacted all the time by people who have, they found a Torah scroll or some manuscript, and you immediately know it's fake because it has a Star of David prominent on the front. I think these are probably made in Turkey or Jordan. There's like a little cottage industry of fakes. But here there's a Star of David that's real. But
Yeah.
so did they like, do we know if they called the Star of David in the 10th to 11th century, or was this just, in other words, we have a Star of David in the Leningrad Codex, but there's just a geometric design. He
Yeah.
also has like a 9-point star or whatever, right? Meaning,
And we also have a sort of an early example of it. We have a child's alphabet primer,
mhm.
a
Hmm.
little booklet for
Is
learning.
that in the book here?
Yeah.
So did Jews in the Egypt believe in magic?
Yes, many of them did. And this was a huge headache to Moses Maimonides when he became the
Hmm.
head of the Jewish community in Egypt. And he actually said specifically about people that wrote their mezuzahs and added the names of angels and and magical symbols onto them. He said that they'll have no part in the world to come.
Wow.
Um, but this didn't stop people of all sorts of walks of life in sort of using it for very everyday things. You'd have someone, if someone's a shopkeeper, they want to, bring people into their shop, they're going to try and use some kind of magical text for that. To go, there's a text that says this shopkeeper wanted these genies to go out and catch the feet of passers-by and draw them into his shop. And we have lots of magic to make people successful in business and to make people fall in love with you. We have childbirth amulets, and some of them have interesting stains on them, so we're not sure if they were there, you know, in the moment. Maybe we can do some analysis of the stains and find that out in the future. Um,
Yeah.
there's
We that there are techniques to do that. So although you're not destroying the document, I think they're considered invasive because you're removing microscopic, like, elements from it. Or but it might be something with photography you can do. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
FTIR maybe. So we have this on the one hand, Jews, or let's say in Judaism, says don't engage in magic, and Maimonides is very upset about the magic. On the other hand, in practice, they're doing it.
Yeah, and even uh, time before Maimonides, there was a head of the community. So a man called Masliach Gaon. He was um, the head in the what was his time? The In the early 12th century, and we have an amulet that was written for him. It didn't it was meant to sort of keep him safe. It didn't work long term
He was
because
the head of the
he got
community, and he had an
he got
amulet written.
executed.
Did he approve of it?
Presumably, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So Maimonides is coming at it from a perspective that it's forbidden, and you even lose your port. Like, it's not even just a harmless thing; you lose your
yeah.
portion in the world to come. So I'm looking here in your book on page 127, and there's something profoundly ironic here. Can you talk about this? This
So
is the
it's this
magical Maimonides.
yes, yeah. So someone after the time of Maimonides, someone has used a page of one of his works to make an amulet out of it.
So they took a page from Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, 36 years after his death, so that's a pretty early copy,
Yeah.
and they've turned it into an amulet.
Yes.
Wow.
Maybe they should have spent a bit more time reading.
Reading it, right. That's very interesting. Yeah. It's that's interesting. And so why are people making amulets? In other words, like I see there's one here for headaches, right?
Yeah. So
So like imagine being Maimonides and you're a doctor and somebody says, "Oh, I don't need your services. I got an amulet."
well, I think it's there to, you're it's to provide support from all different directions. You can consult a physician, you can have an amulet, you're coming at it from different directions.
Mhm.
And some problems, you can't solve very easily. There's a magical spell to make a young child have a bath. And uh, and as if you're a parent of a young child, you can sort of identify with that frustration that that person must have been feeling in order to feel they needed to call on magic to deal with their child.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I usually think of it like, well, there you might have been better off with an amulet than going to a doctor who's going to do like bloodletting, right?
Yeah.
Meaning like at least the amulet in a physical sense, maybe spiritual not. That's debatable. That's a matter of opinion. But in a physical sense, is harmless, right? But whereas going to the doctor, George Washington, our country, not your, but our country's first president, died from medical treatment from bloodletting.
So one of the magical texts that we have in the Genizah is for it's deadly magic, and it's a template, so you can actually
Ooh.
put the name of the person in that you want to have die. And so you say their name and you say this incantation and you write it on these plates of lead and bury it in a fresh grave,
Wow.
and this person
What?
targeted will die. And someone has written a note at the bottom saying this really works.
Wow. And that's in a Jewish text.
Yes.
Have we ever? I don't know. Did anybody ever find lead plates like that with?
Not that I'm aware
That
of.
would be a great find. Now we have the magical bowls, but that's beyond the scope of your book, so let's not get into that. That's the whole thing we could do. It's just very interesting. Like here, I'm looking at on page 119. Talk about this here. I'm going to share the screen. So here you describe this as a seal for demons.
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is like, okay, in Judaism, you would think that there's a prohibition against, let's say, anthropomorphic imagery, meaning Christianity, obviously there is not, but most forms of Christianity. In Islam, I would imagine there is a pretty strict prohibition. And in Judaism, certainly, let's say in an artistic context, they would allow it, but in a religious one, not. Well, I mean, in a sense, this is supernatural. So this is a bit surprising. Talk about this.
Yeah, and so,
Very
these are
surprising.
also very similar to the kinds of drawings of, we sort of think that they're demons. They're the kinds of drawings that you see in magic bowls that you mentioned. These early, because the magic we see in Egypt in the Genizah manuscripts, it really comes from a long line of magical tradition that goes back to Greek and Roman and even maybe earlier.
Well, like I said, it's mentioned in the
Magical
Torah, so that means people were doing it,
Yeah.
right? Meaning maybe not these specific forms, but
So we have amulets for to keep you safe from scorpions, and they incorporate the name of the Greek goddess Aphrodite.
What? In Hebrew or Judeo-Arabic or something?
Yeah, in Hebrew script, yeah,
In
Aphrodite.
Hebrew script.
And
Wow.
the Jewish magician that wrote those amulets to keep people safe from scorpions maybe didn't know that this was the name of a Greek goddess that he was writing down. It's just a magical word that handed down from many generations before of magical practitioners.
There's this thing called the I think it's the Great Leiden Magical Papyrus, if I'm not mistaken, and it has one section which says this spell is something to the effect of this spell or this charm is Hebrew and therefore it's powerful and it's been tested. Right. So, and it's in Greek, and it's clear that there are words you can recognize. The word Baruch, for example, is that's clear what that word. Other words sound like gibberish because they must have overheard a Jewish magician reciting something, and they wrote down what the best they knew how to record the words. Right. I mean, they didn't know Hebrew, so but they probably thought it worked. So,
magic is
very interesting.
Yeah. The liminal area people will take from one.
What do you mean by liminal? Tell us what that means.
It's there on the border between it's in the sort of it's there on the edge of what you're allowed to do, and it's sort of people tend to borrow from other cultures and traditions and then use it for magic in their own one.
Yeah. So, but the death spell that you mentioned, that's obviously not in anybody's border. There's no rabbi who would, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think there's any rabbi who would say that's okay.
No.
Okay. So in other words, so it's interesting, there's this book called Sefer HaRazim, the Book of Secrets, and it's clear that it's not being written by a rabbi, or it mentions the rabbis as this outside group of people who they have great respect for. But it's those guys over there, and it sounds like it's written by someone who is maybe I wouldn't say a less educated Jew because he's educated in a certain field of information, but not the field of information that the intellectuals consider to be important, which is at the time the literature, or let's say the teachings of the sages. I don't know that had been formed as a literature yet. Yeah, that's interesting. So we have this going back to biblical times, and we have it in Iraq in like the 5th, 6th century in those magical bowls, and here we have it in the Middle Ages in the Cairo Genizah. Look, Israel has a law that was passed not that long ago that you're not allowed to give someone an amulet in exchange for their vote. And why did they need to make this law? because that's what parties were doing. There were political parties doing that, and they said, wait, that's a bribe. How is that different than giving them cash, right? Meaning if the person receiving it believes the amulet has power, only if they cast the vote for you, then that's a bribe, right? You're giving them something in exchange. So they're so prevalent in Judaism that we have to have a law in Israel about them. So that's kind of interesting. I'm really interested in this. You have you mentioned the mezuzah. Talk a little bit about how the mezuzah is functioned as an amulet in the Middle Ages.
Well, so I mean, so like amulets you'd wear on your body, you have a bit of parchment with the mezuzah has the text, the biblical text on it that you're meant to have, the Shema.
Yeah.
And then it was to be rolled up and put in a holder, just like how you'd roll up an amulet and put in an amulet holder, which you then wear on your person. But for a mezuzah, you're putting it on your house. And the fact that people are adding other magical elements onto some of their mezuzahs shows us that they were kind of viewing it in a similar kind of way.
And then the fact that and I'm just going to share the screen here again. So here's one that we looked at before, but on page 116. So here is the Shema. And then at the bottom we have, and this is interesting, this is 10th to 11th century, and maybe this is a discussion for when I interview someone else, but we have crowns on the letters. If this really is 10th to 11th century, this might be the earliest text with crowns. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, we're sort of guessing about the time period for it. It might be late. It might be a bit later.
Okay. But anyway, here at the bottom we have 5 stars of David, which, in other words, you're saying they wouldn't have used this as a Jewish symbol; they would have used it as a magical symbol. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think here it's serving a magical purpose. Yeah, but from a similar time period, we have this child's alphabet primer.
Oh, let's see that. And by the way, here at the bottom, after the Shema, is Ya, 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 which is obviously from Hallelujah, a form of the divine name. So they must have understood this as some kind of protection. By the way, this also has widened letters. My guess is this is a little bit later than the 11th century, but since the Cambridge University Library hasn't authorized any carbon-14 tests yet, I guess it's somewhat speculative. It's somewhat of a bitter subject. I'd like to see 14 a few things, but anyway. So the children's document, where can we find that?
It's in the education chapter, and there's a double-page spread that has some of the children's primers where these booklets that they'd be learning the alphabet from.
All right. Yeah, so tell us about the child's, where was the Star of David there?
If you go back up to that one there. So that has the red and it's got,
okay. There's a Star of David. And again, if somebody contacted me on Facebook or by email with this, I would immediately know it was fake because it has a menorah and a Star of David. Those are the 2 telltale signs, except this one's real. Amazing.
It's real, yes. But
this probably is.
It's in the child's alphabet book. It's not on the front cover of a Bible that's being forged in Turkey.
Right. Well, and then it's usually like one page or like, it's a single quire when they have the forged ones. So, what's interesting about this is here are the vowels. And this is how I learned Hebrew in kindergarten. They would have each vowel with the letter Aleph, and you would recite that after the teacher, and then each vowel with the letter Bet. And then we had Vet when I was a kid and we did it. So it would be, and I don't know how they pronounced it. I presume it was the Sephardic pronunciation. So it would be E, etc. Or unless they had some kind of Tiberian, then it would be maybe like E. I don't know. But this is the way we learned Hebrew in the 20th century, and this is almost 1,000 years ago.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And we can see that the Star of David on the cover of the book is being used together with the menorah. So it is being used as a Jewish symbol.
So that's a Jewish symbol. So there's no magical protection in a child's book. That's interesting. Wow. So this could be some of the earliest examples of the Star of, I mean, people think, oh, the Star of David went back to David. Um, there's another narrative that says, no, it's from like the 19th century when it was chosen as a Jewish symbol. And then maybe if you go back to, the 13th century in Prague, it was on the coat of arms of the Jews of Prague, and I actually think, it was in the synagogue there. And I don't know if that's a replica or the original, what they have on display. Like there's this, I think it's a flag, if I remember, in the synagogue in Prague. But here we have it in the Middle East on a Jewish children's book. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
after children mastered the alphabet and the vowels,
Yeah.
they would also learn to write the alphabet in reverse order.
Really?
Yeah, and then they
Do we
would,
have that somewhere here?
um, perhaps.
You mean
And
they'd start with
then,
Tav? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, so starting, yeah,
Oh,
so being able to
wow.
write it backwards and then
Yeah.
writing it in Atbash. So
Oh,
writing
wow.
the first letter and then the last letter and then the second first letter and the second last letter. So it's making sure that the children are able to um use the letters in different combinations and they knew it really well.
So
Really,
Atbash is a code, meaning it's a code, like you said, where instead of Aleph, you write Tav, instead of Bet, you write
yeah.
Shin, etc.
And it's also they could write the alphabet in that way. So
So that's interesting
Bash.
because there's a passage in Rashbam, who is the grandson of Rashi, where he writes in Atbash what he believes the pronunciation of God's name to be. And a later rabbi comes along and says, "This is ridiculous. Anybody could read this. Why even bother with the code?" And so that's interesting. That was so. I wonder if in Rashbam's time or area, whatever, they didn't teach children that way. But and I forget who the other rabbi was. But in this other rabbi's time, he's like, yeah, everybody can read Atbash. Like, so that's really interesting. So it's interesting to me, and I don't know how accurate this is, but there's this idea that I've heard that the reason that you would have a Jewish minister of finance in some Islamic emirate in Spain or something like that is that Jews had very wide and almost universal literacy, whereas the non-Jews in those places in the Middle Ages, unless you were from the nobility, you probably couldn't read and write. Is there what is your thought on that based on these children's books?
yeah, so I don't know whether it translates into the reason that people are being picked as a, finance
Well,
minister.
also they're not going to overthrow the government because no one will follow them. That's another reason.
Yeah.
Sure.
But we do think that for the Jewish community in Egypt in the Middle Ages, it was very widespread literacy. We think that just about all Jewish children, are learning to read and write. And if parents couldn't afford to pay for their children's schooling, then the community would pay because it was seen as the responsibility of
Wow.
the community to ensure that the children have this literacy. And we know that a lot of girls were educated as well. We have letters that were sent home from school. There's one in the book. A teacher writes back to let the boy's family know that he's been fighting with his sister in school today.
Oh, okay. We got to look at that. Where is
Yeah.
that? That's cool.
It'll be in the education
Okay.
chapter
Okay.
as well.
Let's find that. That's worth showing people. Let me look for the word sister
So
here.
it's on
Oh,
254.
254. All right. Oh, that's cool. What that reminds me of is there's this old Disney movie. I think they made a remake, but I haven't seen that, where Lilo and Stitch, where like I don't know, Stitch is like an alien or something, but he's really like a puppy, and he's fighting with his sister. And I had four sisters. I'm like, this is a documentary. Like, this is so accurate of what it's like to have sisters and brothers. I didn't have any brothers, but I grew up with four sisters. I'm like, wow, that looks like my upbringing. And so this is letter about an unruly student. I love it.
So the
And
teacher picked this bit of scrap of parchment. See, there's a hole in the
yeah,
middle of it. This
okay.
was a hole in the original parchment. So
Mm,
words are written around it. It's not like that hole has fallen out afterwards. And on
hmm.
the back is another letter that presumably was sent to the teacher. So he's reused something that someone
Okay.
sent to him.
So is there
And
something on the other side, or is
yeah,
this a palimpsest?
no, there's something on the other side of it.
Okay. All right. Parchment
And
was expensive. I'm surprised to use parchment, meaning they had paper in the 12th to 13th century. Wouldn't that be
yeah,
cheaper?
but he's just making use of this scrap that he's got
Okay.
in hand, and he's letting the boy's older brother know because the parents are not well, so the boy's older brother is the responsible adult.
Okay.
This boy has been fighting with his sister in school, and he gave him a beating. But then the teacher from the next classroom came rushing in, and it was a female teacher, and she came rushing in. She said, "Stop, you're about to kill him."
Oh,
So he
wow.
stopped, and he's written this note home instead so that maybe the boy will get more of a beating when he gets home.
Oh, wow. And what's interesting is, so this is in Hebrew characters, but this is Arabic.
Yeah, Arabic language, which everyone is using. But
Although the opening greeting looks to me, and I'm not sure, but I believe that's Aramaic. Tafrach tav uvarich. And then he oh, maybe that's Arabic too, I don't know.
yeah,
Um, good morning and blessed. And then aladi al alam or something, that's clearly Arabic. Wow. So the language of communication was Hebrew characters, but the Arabic language.
yeah. So Jewish children are learning to write in they learn to read Hebrew so they can read the Bible,
Hmm.
and then it becomes just uh sort of the next sort of stage would be to write the language that you speak, which is Arabic, with the Hebrew characters that you've learned for your
Hmm.
religious instruction.
So that's interesting. We have this kind of idea that Hebrew was a dead language for nearly 2,000 years, and and then people, they kind of jump to the conclusion, oh, that's like Akkadian, that was a dead language, right?
No,
Or ancient Egyptian. Well, ancient Egyptian is different, but Akkadian was, nobody could read or write Akkadian for, I don't
no,
know,
but
2,000
then
years. Hebrew, that was never the case. People
no.
always read. So talk to me about that, because we have these books here where they're learning Hebrew. This isn't the product of the 19th century Zionist movement. This is 11th to 13th century.
Yeah. So, like I said, Jewish children are learning Hebrew, and the boys will then be able to read in the synagogue,
Mhm.
and they needed to know Hebrew because Hebrew was what was used in the synagogue. And also, if you met a Jewish person from another country, your common language that you're going to be able to communicate in. If someone comes from Byzantium, they don't know Arabic,
Mhm.
you can speak to them in Hebrew. And more learned people are able to compose really, really lovely letters in Hebrew. So it's not in any way really a dead language.
Okay. And maybe it's analogous to some extent to the way Latin was used in medieval Europe, right? Nobody ever stopped speaking Latin. They just weren't speaking it as their mother tongue.
Yeah, yeah,
So, wow, that's very cool. Um, here's something where it says reading from all sides on page 255. I
yeah,
love this. Talk about, so here's again, guys, this is part of the whole subject of education, which is, I mean, it's a rare glimpse because, when I was growing up, history was dates of battles and kings. And then here we have an access to, well, this is what education was like in the 11th or 13th century. And that's something, that's a side of history that the ruling elite, when they write history, centuries ago, they wouldn't write about that. It's like and I don't know if this is true, but there's this meme going around that hundreds of years ago, there were three condiments on the table: pepper, salt, and we don't know what the third one was. And again, that might just be an urban legend, but the idea there is, well, why would anybody write about what the condiments on the table are? Everybody knows that. Well, now we don't know because it's hundreds of years later and nobody bothered to write it. Here we have a glimpse into what daily life was like. I love this. So what's this thing about reading from all sides on page
so
255?
so books are fairly expensive, and not in a classroom, not every child is having their own book to read from. And even when
Mm,
they grow up, when they're older, maybe in the synagogue, in other sort of situations, they won't have their own book. So you can't only learn to read what's right in front of you. What about if you have to read if you're standing at the side of someone who's holding the book, or being able to read upside down? If you're all standing around and someone's holding a page in the middle and you're looking at it upside down, you have to be able to read from all directions. So this letter that you're talking about was sent from a father who's away traveling for work, and he sends he sends this letter back, saying, make sure he learns to read. My child learns to read from all different sides.
That's so cool. So what's cool about that especially is that that was documented in the 20th century in the Jewish communities of Yemen, because Yemen is one of the few Jewish communities that never had printing. And so they were still producing manuscripts in the 20th century, and books were still rare. And they were so isolated that you might have 10 or more children reading from one book, and you see there's photos, like, meaning it's in the photographic age, where they're sitting around in a circle all reading from a book from different angles. That's amazing. And this was going on in the 13th century. It's very cool.
And in that same letter, he also says, if we could go back to look at
Yeah.
again?
And this letter is in Hebrew. This is not in Arabic.
Yeah.
So people were writing Hebrew, and you said he was because he was from Byzantium, so he didn't know Arabic.
Yeah.
Okay. Or maybe he was more comfortable in Hebrew, right? Maybe he spoke it but wasn't fluent.
So he asks so he's sending this letter from abroad to his friend, and then the friend is going to pass the message on to the boy's mother. And he also says, make sure that she tells them to wash the children to wash their hands, and not to play outside where things might fall on them. You imagine like bits of brick falling on the children,
or people are throwing their night pot out into the street, right? Meaning, wow, that's very cool.
But make sure they wash their hands. I
wow,
like that.
That's very cool. So this is kind of like a glimpse into daily life. This is what blows my mind is that this is one Genizah from one synagogue, which yes lasted a long time, right? I mean, I don't know. What's the latest document from the Genizah? I don't know the answer to that. I saw a newspaper.
So all the manuscripts that we call the Cairo Genizah now, it's a little bit more complicated than it seems, because some things made their way into the collection in Cambridge, and so there's a bit of a Yiddish newspaper that probably Solomon Schechter was looking at himself, and somehow it got mixed up.
So not everything necessarily came from the Ben Ezra synagogue.
Yeah,
and there's stuff I think I had Ben Althwaite on a few years back, and I don't remember. I think he said that that I don't remember if he talked just to me privately or in public about the cemetery. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so there was a nearby Jewish cemetery, and some of the manuscripts were taken and buried there. And
so not everything came from the synagogue; some came from a nearby cemetery.
Yeah, right. And so after Schechter brought the manuscripts, a lot of manuscripts back to Cambridge, he left some money in Egypt, and he said, if anyone else finds some more old manuscripts and you want to send them in, we'll buy them. And so over the next few years, lots of other manuscripts were sent in to Cambridge and became sort of included in the Cairo Genizah collection.
Okay.
Many of them were originally from this synagogue and this storage room, but not all.
Okay. So I saw in the book here there is a Yiddish codex. What's the story of that? Because the Yiddish newspaper, Schechter was reading that, but
Yiddish codex is old.
Okay.
And so it's called the Yiddish Codex. It's not actually a codex, not a book. It has.
Let me show the photo here, guys. This is on page 25. I mean, this is just the diversity and the eclectic nature of this collection is astounding. So it's not a codex, okay?
Yeah, so it's a collection of texts that are now put together as a book. It has some early Yiddish texts that were I think it's from the 14th century.
It says 1382, and it's not approximately, so there must be some internal evidence of how you know it's specifically 1382. Okay,
yeah.
So that's really interesting because in the 14th century, at least there's now a hypothesis or a theory that there was a genetic bottleneck stemming out of the massacres of the from the Black Death. In other words, the Jews were blamed for the Black Plague, and there were massacres all over Europe. And then when you come out of the 14th century, there's a relatively small number of Jews, and I've heard numbers that I don't believe. Like there was 350. That doesn't make any sense to me, but I don't know. Um, maybe 350 families, even that doesn't make sense. But that there's this genetic bottleneck. It's one of the reasons Ashkenazi Jews have so many genetic diseases, because there was 10 million people descended from a very small number. But here in 1382, they're writing. How does this reach the Cairo Genizah?
Yeah, people, I mean, books last for a long time, and even like sort of pamphlets and
Yeah.
leaves, people travel around with them, people keep them, hand them down uh to their children and grandchildren, and we have a fairly lengthy correspondence from the 15th century, between that's in Yiddish, between a mother in Jerusalem, and she'd moved to Jerusalem. She's originally from Prague, and she writes to her son, who's based in Cairo.
Wow.
And so we have her letters to him, and then he presumably gathers them all up, and eventually they end up
So
in the Genizah.
so so, and I maybe this is outside your purview, but I want to just like ponder this for a minute. You have a Jew from Prague
Yeah.
who's writing in Yiddish, who moves to Jerusalem in what you said, the 15th century,
Yes.
and has a son in Cairo.
Yes.
So this,
And she's trying, and he's
yeah,
married, and he's living in Cairo, and she's trying to persuade him to move to Jerusalem. And she says, "There's lots of opportunities for you to open a shop here, maybe.
wow.
You're not
So
writing to me often enough."
it
So
sounds
she's
like my
like,
mother. Um, so although she does, I don't WhatsApp her often enough, but I wonder how usual this is that you have a community who has, meaning like there's this idea that in the Middle Ages most people never went 5 miles from their home. Let's say the peasants, right? Meaning maybe the nobles did, they traveled all over, but the average person who wasn't part of the ruling class didn't travel. And if they went, like, the Canterbury Tales, it was a really big deal because they're traveling, maybe hundreds of miles or something, right? It was like a once in a lifetime kind of thing that it would do. And here you have this international, I'm afraid to use the phrase, this international community, or this, I mean, yeah, it's really an international family in this case. And it doesn't sound like these are ruling classes. She's like, oh, come and open up a little shop, right? Right? These aren't people who are independently wealthy. And they're traveling all over the world, and they're part of an integrated Jewish community in the sense that he can live in Prague, and I know not all Jews could live at wherever they wanted, right? She's probably left Prague because of persecution, I would imagine, but she has the ability to integrate into a community in Prague, in Cairo, in Israel, in Jerusalem, and this is all part of. I mean, she would come to Israel, and they wouldn't say, "Oh no, you're an Ashkenazi Jew." You're. I mean, maybe she went to a different synagogue, right? But I mean, that's an interesting thing. Like, how much of this internationalism do we see in the Cairo Genizah?
yeah,
These
I mean,
international trade connections. Like we saw a guy from Byzantium.
yeah. So I mean, so Rachel from Prague, she's in the 15th century, but um, going back to the 11th century, 12th century, we've got people traveling very widely, and it's the really the norm for young men if they want to,
Really?
if they want to do anything, they get into trade, and they work maybe helping someone else for a bit before they taking on more responsibility for themselves, and they'll go. In the 11th century, it's mainly focused around the Mediterranean. So people are going on short trips, maybe for a few weeks, and they can actually, if they have family, they can take their family with them. The Jewish communities all over the place. Then, when the Italians start to dominate the Mediterranean, it becomes less secure. So Jews in Egypt turn towards India, and they start traveling to India. And then you're going sort of, you know, 5 years, 10 years or more at a time.
Okay, that's not a
You
short
can't
excursion to India back then, I guess.
Yeah, and you can't take your family with you. So you leave them back in Cairo, and maybe you come back, maybe you don't, maybe you meet someone in India and you stay there. Uh,
Wow.
and so,
So I think one of the things Ben talked about when I had him on, if I remember, was the letter of Maimonides' brother, who died on a trip to India, right?
Yeah, yeah. We think the destination was probably India, but yeah, he died after getting on a boat at the Sudanese port of Aidab and
Wow.
sailing off into the Indian Ocean somewhere.
Well, and what they called India might not be what we call India today, right? Meaning if they're going to the Spice Islands or wherever, they might have called that Hodu, right? I mean, I don't
Yeah,
know.
Mangalore. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the most interesting document for you in this book?
Okay, so there are so many. It's really hard to choose a favorite, but
You don't have to choose. We'll do multiple.
oh,
Top five.
okay. So when we have visitors to Cambridge University Library, people come see the Genizah. I almost always show this particular manuscript. It's a prenuptial contract, a prenup from the 11th century, and it's I find it just very funny because it's a man and he's before he gets married, he's having to stand up in court and promise to behave himself, that he won't have anything to do with his drunken, dissolute, idiotic friends. He won't drink with them in the street. He won't have anything to do with them. He won't bring them back to his house. And he also promises that he won't go off traveling anywhere unless his future wife gives him permission to do that.
Wow.
And he promises he won't get a slave girl for himself unless future wife, who's called
And
Pfizer.
and and this so okay. What's the term? Do you remember what the term there is for slave girl like that?
Oh, it's it's uh it's essentially to be a concubine. So
Okay, so it's not like she's doing the dishes. She's okay. So that was an option in
yes, it's the option if
Muslim
his wife
countries,
gives
let's
you
say.
permission. Yeah.
Okay. So wow. So he's committing not to do that. That's
He promises
yeah.
all these things. It's very embarrassing that, that he says sort of 10 different words for drunken, idiotic friends. These were really, he's winning with a bad crowd, but he promises he's going to behave himself.
Okay.
So
Wow.
this prenup is exactly tailored to the concerns of that individual couple and the
Uh-huh.
situation. And yeah, I just find it very funny.
All right. So that's one. What's the next one?
Okay, other ones. So I often show the people that letter of the boy at school that was given a beating for fighting with his
Mhm.
sister.
Yeah.
There's another one that was sent home from school, a teacher letting the boy's parents know that he was bullied at school that day, and the bullies broke his writing board, and
Wow.
um, and so the teacher's letting the parents know it wasn't his fault. He wasn't careless. He's kind of new at the school and he was being a little bit too clever, and they bullied him.
What
And
what what is a writing board in this context? I think
so
of like
it's
in the
not,
Roman period.
so it's sort of a little table for your lap, really. So it's a little wooden board that you balance across your knees, and then you could sort of rest on that for
Oh,
doing.
oh, oh, it's not like a pin axe covered with wax where
No, I
they're
think it's
okay.
like a little tray table sort of thing.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's like the desk basically.
Yeah.
They didn't have desks. Okay, interesting. All right, what's number 3?
Okay.
In no particular order.
Another one that I really like to show show visitors, is a letter that was written by a professional scribe. He's writing it for a poor older woman who is completely destitute, and she's got absolutely nothing at all to her name. She's got no family, she's got no clothes, she's unwell, and she's even got a flesh-eating disease on her nose that's
Oh,
caused her
wow.
nose to be eaten away. And
Do we know what that was? Is that like leprosy or something?
they're calling it that, but
Okay, we don't
it
know.
could have been any kind of flesh-eating bacteria.
Oh,
So
wow.
she's in a really bad way, and the scribe has written this letter for her in the 11th century to the head of the Jews, just um, asking for help for to be, maybe he can uh, connect her with a community, maybe in a smaller town outside Cairo, and they'll be responsible for looking after her. And the fact that we have her, details about her life and her experiences there alongside all the other sort of more famous people in the Genizah, like Moses
Yeah.
Maimonides, I think is really really special, and it shows just how charitable and generous the community was, and they had a big sort of call on their resources after the First Crusade, and you had so many refugees
Mm.
coming down to Egypt, and the Egyptian community, Jewish community, raised huge amounts of money to support these newcomers.
Okay. Wow. So
But
yeah, meaning the Jews of Jerusalem. There's a story. I don't know how accurate it is that they were all gathered into the synagogue and it was set on fire. But there were some refugees who escaped. There are also prisoners. We'll look at that. We'll talk about Maimonides in a minute. We'll look at some of those documents. This is very cool. All right. What's your number 4?
okay, so number 4, I would say is a trousseau list. So it's a
Spell that for people. I know that word, but probably most. And for those who are from a Jewish background, that's nedunya.
yeah.
What is trousseau? It's a
So
French word.
a trousseau. So I'll describe what it is. It's so when a bride is getting married, she or someone with her would make a list of every single thing that she owns, that she is
Hmm.
taking into the marriage with her. So all of her clothes, and in this particular one, because she's a very wealthy woman, it lists all of her clothes in a lot of detail, her jewelry, and the colors and the stones that are in her jewelry, and uh, her household items. She's got a pen writing set from China. She's got a medical kit.
She
She's
has a
got
pen writing set from China, and it
yep,
says China. What is
yep.
China called? Do you remember?
I have to consult
Let's
the
look in the book.
but
What page
yeah,
is that? That's
yeah,
cool enough to.
yeah. So
That's very cool. And
yeah.
and what's the purpose of writing this list? That well, I'll
So
let you say
if
that. What's
they
the
get
purpose?
divorced, if they
Hmm.
get divorced, she can take all of these things with her.
Okay. So and then part of the Jewish traditional, let's say, marriage is that there's a ketubah where he has to pay her sort of like some money when if they get divorced.
Yeah. And so she'll get
And
money and she'll get these things. And if she can't get
right,
these
so
things, she'll
so
get
she
their
so he
monetary.
can't say, "Oh, I'm paying you it in the form of this pen writing from China." She's like, "No, I brought that in. That doesn't
Yeah,
count."
yeah.
Okay, very cool.
So it's on page 196.
All right,
So she's got uh,
let's
a,
284 we have to look at too. 196. Let me find that
a
here.
pair of peacock pins, a crystal rooster, equipment for
This is
bloodletting,
this is
cloud
like
colored,
equipment for bloodletting. You said.
yeah, a green robe with
Here
gold
it is.
thread and a wax colored wimple. So that's sort of a head covering.
Tell us what a wimple is.
Yeah, it's a sort of a a head covering for women. She's got a blue
Okay.
handbag,
Uh-huh.
and she's got 250 dinars worth of books. She's got a lot of books.
So what do you like about this so much? Because
So
I know a lot of people will hear that and say, "Who cares about the what was in her dowry or trousseau? That's boring." But
it helps me imagine what the streets were like, and you're walking along and running into people who are wearing things like this. I mean, maybe they weren't.
hmm.
She wasn't dressed up in all of this stuff every day, but it just the colors of her clothes and
So it says here a cloud colored festival attire consisting of a robe, a wimple, and a grayish headband. So that's worth 50 dinars. So
yeah.
is that something she would have worn like on the Jewish holidays to synagogue, do we think, or what do we think here?
Yeah, or if she had some other special occasion to go to, I don't know.
Hmm.
A green robe with gold threads. It all sounds great. And
And she has 4 enslaved women named Iz, Dalal, Nusa, and Wafa.
yes,
What? So
yeah.
they're not her concubines, right? I mean, what is their
So they would probably be helping her in the home, and a lot of the slaves that were owned by Jewish families came from sub-Saharan Africa and from India. Um, so
wow.
so they so these slaves were then brought in, became sort of members of the household, they would have Shabbat off.
So
They'd be
how do sub-Saharan Africans end up in Egypt being purchased by Jews as slaves? Like the Jews
yeah.
didn't go to sub-Saharan Africa to kidnap them, I imagine, or maybe
Well,
I'm asking. I don't know.
yeah. So they're probably being brought up by traders and purchased. There's a woman who writes to her trader husband who's gone over to India, saying, "Can you bring me back a young child, no more than 6?"
So so help me understand this. And maybe we'll edit this part out. He goes to India. Who does he just kidnap a 6-year-old, or
No,
does
I
he
mean,
buy the
probably,
child
yeah,
on a
yeah,
market?
buying a child in a market, yeah.
So that's one of the things I've heard lately is that um, I don't know if it's Britain or England in 1830, but whichever it was the first country in history to abolish slavery, or the slave trade. And slavery is a universal human experience, meaning like this is and certainly under let's say Islamic rule, it was just like being under Roman rule. It's just what you do. So there probably some, and there's this great story of what is his name? I want to say he's 15th century. He's a rabbi, and there are these 2 slaves from Ethiopia that a Jewish family purchases, and they find out they've been purchased by a Jew, and they say, "We're Jewish." And the rabbi goes and investigates, and he finds out there's Jews in Ethiopia. And he says, "Okay, you have to, I don't remember. I think maybe they freed them or something. But it's I believe it's the first like historical reference to the Ethiopian Jews, and he says they're Jews for all intents and purposes. They're no different than any other Jews. They're an established Jewish community, and we have to treat them like any other Jews." And I can't remember his name. It's like on the tip of my tongue. But wow, so that's interesting. So there's it's that's I find that very interesting because the Arabic word abd, which is the cognate of the Hebrew eved, slave, refers to means black person. Meaning that is in modern Arabic at least. Abd refers to any black person. In the way that in English the word slave comes from the word Slav, because the Vikings would kidnap all these Slavic people, and most slaves are very common to have a slave who was Slavic. And in Arabic, the equivalent is abd for black person. That's kind of mind blowing because coming from the United States, we have this idea that this is, that there's people who call it the original sin of America. It's this uniquely American thing to specifically enslave black people. But why did they enslave black people? Because that's who they bought from the Arab slave traders on the west coast of Africa, probably. I mean, not probably, is documentation about that. Not the only way in which black people were enslaved, but so to see this is going on in the 13th century or 12th century here, sorry, it says 1128 to 1153. That's, I don't know. It kind of gives me it's I don't know. It's chilling. It's horrifically chilling. Let's put it that way. So wow, that's wow. All right, but she's got a pen. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and we can find out what about the lives of some of these enslaved people in the Genizah manuscripts again, which is really rare to have that insight into people of that level of society. Don't normally make it into the historical record.
So what do we know about the enslaved people?
So there's I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I don't think it's in the book. Um, there's a man, he goes to court and he says that he'd promised his wife that he was going to free her slave woman, but he was just sort of clarifying in court that he hadn't meant it. And
Does that count to say I didn't mean it?
yes. So
Okay, and she's upset because she
this-
wants her slave to be freed.
she did, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and she couldn't free the
He,
slave herself. It was up to her
so
husband.
So while they're married, I think he's sort of administratively responsible for his wife's possessions, which include her her enslaved woman, and he's he's not being very nice about it, saying that
Hmm.
he promised to free her, but he's actually not.
And he's like, I lied,
Yes,
and
yes,
I'm not bound by what I said. That's kind of shocking to me. All right, so I typed here the word China to see what else you have about China, because like that seems so like we have a Jewish community in China in this period, right? Meaning there's the Jews of Kaifeng who
yeah.
are there from at least the Song Dynasty. Some people say a lot older, meaning the oldest. I want to say it's the oldest documents in Hebrew script after the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I'm not mistaken, are from the Afghan Genizah, which is a different story and a different interview. And they're on the Silk Road, and they're written Judeo-Persian, and they're part of trade with China. So here we have on page 284, you have this lovely Sephardi Haggadah with human-headed snakes, and says here, okay, it's talking about how paper. Talk about paper, because most people, it's there's something called the Tiffany paradox. The Tiffany paradox is if you're writing fiction, you can't in the Middle Ages you can't have a figure named Tiffany because people assume Tiffany is a modern name, which it's not. It existed in the Middle Ages. So the example in my field is the word bottle, which appears in the book of Jeremiah. People are like, oh, that's an anachronism. Bottles didn't exist. Yes, they did. They weren't made of glass necessarily. Well, in the time of Jeremiah, they definitely weren't made of glass, right? But the word bottle actually appears in even the Hebrew word bottle, bakbuk, if I'm not mistaken, which is onomatopoeia, appears in ancient sources. So paper existed in the Cairo Genizah going back to a pretty early period. And how is that possible? Isn't paper a modern invention?
So the technology for making paper gets developed in China a long time the before our Geniza times, the Middle Ages. Um, so this gets invented in China, and it gradually spreads westward, making its way along the various trade routes, and it doesn't get really to Egypt in any significant amount until the 10th century. And then from the 10th century onwards, we have paper making firmly established in Egypt. They make it out of old clothes that are mashed up for their fibers, and the sheets of paper are made out of clothes, so it's called rag paper. If you
And
look at
by
the
the way, US dollar bills in the 21st century are made from denim, right? Meaning, and in this case, it's not necessarily old clothes. I think they're specifically made for that, or they're cuttings from it. But to this day, that the feeling of U.S. money, I think in the UK it's plastic today, or some kind of
yeah.
nylon or something. But to this day, we're making paper out of cloth. Wow, that's and so okay.
So
So yeah,
if you look at the Geniza papers under a microscope, you'll see the fibers of the clothes that we used to make them.
wow.
And um, the arrival of paper in Egypt it means a lot of things. It really democratizes the writing process because instead of having to rear and slaughter a sheep to get writing material, which is a time-consuming and expensive process, you can make paper more cheaply. And so maybe in schools before the 10th century, maybe children were mainly learning to read, but from 10th, 11th century onwards, they're writing as well. So we have
Mm,
their homework exercises. They're practicing to write,
wow.
and and then later on, paper gets made with in different ways. So you can see paper from certain periods looks quite different.
Mhm.
My co-author Nick Posgay is the big sort of expert on
Watermarks, right?
paper and watermarks, and yeah,
Are
and
there watermarks in the like 11th century or 12th century? Or is that a later thing?
no, it's a later thing. Yeah,
Okay. And so explain what watermark. I know Nick is the expert, but if you could just
yeah.
explain.
So
Do you have watermarks in the Karaganiza?
we do, yes, and we
Oh,
have some in
wow.
the book as well.
Where is that in the book? Where can we,
Going to be
that's
in,
cool.
I think in bookmaking or in printing.
Here we go. So it starts on page
Yeah, yeah,
282.
yeah.
Watermark. Oh, this is cool. So I'm going to share this. This is very cool. So here's the watermarks. And so what is this, and why is it important for? Wow, I mean, here you have a date 1483 to 1509. That's very
So,
specific.
so the paper makers, they have these metal grids that they're spreading this pulp on that will be turned into the sheet of paper, and these sort of metal grids, and they to sort of brand them and say, okay, well, we made this one, that's why it's so nice. They start to put pictures in them. And so
Yeah,
I think in the on that page or the page after that in the book, there's a
yeah.
watermark.
Here's a watermark of kind of, I don't know what that is, like a.
Mer On the next page, I think there's a mermaid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a mermaid there.
So whoever's using the paper doesn't know there's a mermaid here and doesn't care
Well, if they'd held it up,
necessarily.
so if they'd held up their sheet of paper to the light, that's when you
Yeah.
can see that mark in the paper shining through. So we took these
Okay.
pictures, Nick took these pictures with a backlight to
Right.
get the effect. But if you hold
Very
it up to a
cool.
light, you'll be able to see them.
And the significance, I'm told, I know almost nothing about this, is that these meshes didn't last that long, and so you can date the if you have a dated manuscript with the watermark, you
Yes.
can then analogize that to an undated manuscript and say within a relatively tight frame when the document was written. I've seen stuff from like the 15th century where they'll date it within a decade.
Yeah.
And their argument is, well, that the watermark from that manufacturer changed a decade later, unless it was really old paper stock, right? Then you never know, right? But still, it gives you a very tight framework for dating them, and they have these books with like thousands of watermarks from dated manuscripts and documents. It'll show this form of it with, let's say the mermaid has like a certain form of the tail or something. I don't know. Or she has 3 wings instead of 2 wings is from has a thing from this specific period. It's like this whole world. We'll have
Yes.
to have Nick on to talk about that because
Yes.
it's
He
kind
loves
of
watermark.
fascinating.
And so if you see the kind of paper that might have a watermark, then first thing you do when you're looking at a Genizah manuscript like that is to hold it up to the light. Oh, yes,
Okay.
there's a watermark there. And because the watermarks for these pages were made as great big sheets that were then cut up into smaller
Oh.
pages for sale, so you might just get the edge of the watermark in on your manuscript, and so you've got
Okay.
like half of a pair of scissors, and
And you don't have the whole manuscript. You
yes,
might have one page or something.
yes,
And then that's another interesting thing. The watermarks change throughout manuscripts, right? Meaning I've looked at like complete manuscripts when I was in Rome, and I'm looking at the watermark, and then I go like 100 pages later, and it's a different watermark because they ran out of that, ream of paper or whatever, and went to another one. And so this is actually quite interesting because here you have the Babylonian Talmud from around 1480, and it has a watermark, and it reminds me of this story in the I forget who the rabbi was, but he goes to the bathhouse in Caesarea, and his students, they're upset. They say, "There's a statue of Aphrodite there. What are you doing going to the bathhouse?" And he says, "She came into my bathhouse. I didn't go into hers." So meaning like when they're writing the here it's let's see, it's a Hebrew grammar by David Kimchi by Radak. They're not concerned that there's a mermaid there because it's not functionally part of the paper, right? It's just paper. Oh, and then the next page has the one I was talking about before, the Sephardi Haggadah with the human-headed snakes. Can you talk about this? Is cool. This reminds me of Kennicott 1, which has the anthropomorphic letters, where the scribe writes his name in these like human-shaped letters. But these are like, what was the purpose of this?
so they're just decorative. They've decorated the letters and put little
Okay.
slits of them. It's a page from Passover Haggadah. It's not typical of what we see in the Genizah. It's come from Europe. It's come from Spain,
Okay.
possibly with people fleeing Spain, and they've brought their book with them. So it comes from a different world to the to
So Jews fled Spain, and they go all over the Mediterranean,
yes,
And
Yes.
this is one of the things confusing. I once had a conversation with someone online about this Sephardic Jew, and he said, "Oh, his grandmother must be 400 years old because there haven't been Jews in Spain since 1492." And I'm like, "Wait, what? No." So, and this is interesting. So the Jews of Egypt are called Sephardic, which means Spanish, but they were there before the Jews fled from Spain. So it's a bit of
Yeah.
meaning the more popular term will be to call them the Edota Mizrach, the communities of the East. But then the Shas party in Israel, they say, no, we're Sephardic, right? Our founders are from Morocco, but their ancestors were refugees from Spain.
So in the 14th and 15th centuries, there's not a great deal of manuscripts from in the Genizah from that time, but then from the later in the 15th and 16th century on, you see a huge amount of text, and they're different kinds of text, more Hebrew, and in cursive script. And so these are written by people who came and settled in Egypt, and they started living around the Ben Ezra synagogue again and using it more, and so they revitalized the community and sort of changed the nature of the manuscripts we find in the Genizah as a result.
Wow. So there's this large influx of, let's say, very educated, super educated Jews coming from Spain and probably Portugal as well. Wow, that's very interesting. So it's almost like there's, like, I know I've heard Ben talk about like the golden age, I think he calls it, of the Genizah, or the classical age of the Genizah. And then maybe there's like I've heard people say there's like the second golden age of the Genizah, following the influx of Jews from Iberia. So that's really interesting. Wow. Speaking of Jews from Iberia, let's talk about, we know we talked about the slave girls. Let's talk about the more famous people, Maimonides.
Okay.
And maybe other famous, who before we get to Maimonides, who are some other famous people whose, not just copies of their works, but what we would call like autographs, like stuff, not that they signed their name necessarily, but stuff they wrote with their own hand. Who are some of the most famous people in the Cairo Genizah?
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.